Serving child victims of sexual exploitation can come with its challenges. Not every organization is equipped with the resources it needs to provide care. First Alert 6 Philip Katafamo shares a new study hoping to change that.
Project Harmony is one of many organizations focused on helping victims of child abuse. One way is through their multidisciplinary team, or MDT, which is made up of social workers, police, and medical providers.
The purpose of the multidisciplinary team is to bring together professionals involved in cases of child abuse and neglect to share information, problem solve, and move cases forward.
In 2024, Project Harmony served more than 9,800 children throughout Nebraska, mostly in Douglas County. It also participated in nearly 180 MDT meetings. Nebraska requires MDTs, but some states don't, resulting in a fragmented system with inconsistencies in care.
When agencies are working in silos and not communicating and sharing information with each other, that's where you end up seeing gaps in services or children potentially falling through the cracks.
Those cracks in the system are something researchers at the University of Nebraska, Omaha are taking a look at. They're kicking off a nationwide study to try to fill some of those holes in service.
We know that kids who are harmed at a young age, that can follow them throughout the rest of their life, but early and effective interventions can just be a real turning point, and that support and that need is so great.
UNO is one of 3 universities participating in this study. It will review how MDTs coordinate care for sexually exploited children and where their systems break down in an effort to better serve victims.
We're going to create a multidisciplinary team guidebook that could be used based on not only what we identified in the systematic review, but giving that overview of the type of landscape of what types of teams exist, how do they operate, who's involved, whether some of the successes or challenges maybe that they're experiencing.
A systematic review is underway with existing MDTs across the country, including Nebraska. Next will be a national survey of practitioners across many jurisdictions. The survey is expected to wrap in 2028. In Omaha, I'm Philip Katafamo, First Alert 6.
The team at UNO is looking for MDTs to participate in this survey. Information on how to participate can be found with this story on our website, firstalert6.com.